The Capuchin catacombs in Palermo are engulfed in a deathly silence, as if time had ceased flowing for centuries. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of old earth and the breath of forgotten souls. The cold gray stone walls seem to ooze silent whispers, murmuring secrets that the living were never meant to know. Along the dimly lit corridors, thousands of mummified bodies line the walls, twisted figures, their skin stretched tight over brittle bones like abandoned dolls. But among the sea of withered corpses, one figure stands out. Clara. A small girl lies within a glass coffin, her fragile hands folded neatly over her chest, her face pale beyond belief. Her lips are sealed, her skin smooth as wax, and if not for the absence of breath, one could almost mistake her for merely sleeping. But Clara is dead, has been for over 100 years. Her uncanny appearance draws crowds from all over the world. Some come out of scientific curiosity, marveling at how a body could resist the ravages of time. But others, the ones who revel in the eerie and the macabre, are drawn by the chilling stories that surround her. They whisper that at night, when the last light in the catacombs flickers out and the heavy iron gates slam shut, Clara's eyes slowly open. No one knows why. No one dares to ask. But the legend spreads like a plague, passed down through generations, turning the little girl into a dark myth, a tale murmured around fires, voices trembling, eyes darting toward the shadows. One late evening, long after the last footsteps of tourists had faded into the night, a lone figure lingered in the catacombs. Ethan. A young historian from America, he stood motionless in the cold passage, his sharp eyes flickering under the dim glow of his flashlight. His hair was tousled, his face shadowed with exhaustion, but in his chest burned an insatiable hunger. He had spent years studying Clara, drawn to the mystery of her uncorrupted body like a moth to a flame. The caretakers of the catacombs, used to his strange fascination, allowed him to stay a little longer, though unease flickered in their eyes. Ethan stepped closer to the glass coffin, each footfall echoing like a slow heartbeat within the catacomb's ribcage. The flashlight's beam swept across Clara's face, casting eerie shadows on the walls, shapes that seemed to shift, to breathe. He stared at the girl, searching for a sign, any proof that the rumors were true. Impossible, he murmured, his voice rough, his breath forming a thin mist in the freezing air. The dead can't just open their eyes. But the moment the words left his lips, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the corridor, a wind that carried something unnatural, something not of this world. The flashlight in Ethan's hand flickered, sputtered, then died, plunging him into total darkness. His heart pounded, each beat deafening in the silence. A cold sweat prickled his skin as the wind howled through the cracks in the stone. And then, a faint glow. Pale, ghostly blue light seeped from within the coffin, illuminating the girl's face as if she were glowing from the inside out. Ethan's breath hitched. His pulse thundered. Then, to his absolute horror, Clara's long lashes fluttered. And slowly, ever so slowly, her eyes opened. Deep, icy blue, like the abyss of a frozen ocean, staring straight into his. Not the vacant stare of a corpse, but the gaze of something alive. Aware. Haunted. Ethan staggered back, his foot striking against stone. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs like a drum of war. This isn't real. This can't be real. But Clara remained still, her unblinking eyes locked onto him, as if she had been waiting. Waiting for him. Waiting for something beyond the grave. A distant footstep echoed down the corridor, breaking the suffocating stillness. Ethan turned sharply, nothing but shadows stretching into endless black. When he looked back, Clara's eyes were closed again. Her face was peaceful, untouched by the terror that had just unfolded. Ethan fled the catacombs that night, but Clara's eyes never left him. They had burned into his mind like a brand, an unshakable curse. Had he imagined it? Had his mind conjured horrors out of thin air? Or had he just witnessed something truly unspeakable? One thing he knew for certain. Clara was not just a corpse. She was trying to tell him something. And he would not stop until he uncovered the horrifying truth hidden within those frozen blue eyes. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Clara's deep blue eyes burned in his mind like ghostly embers, pulling him into a nightmare with no escape. He sat in his small room, the weak yellow light flickering over stacks of old books and ink-stained papers. The wind howled through the cracks in the window, like a distant voice wailing in the night, blending with the heavy pounding of his heart. He knew what he had seen in the catacombs. It wasn't an illusion, nor a trick of the light. Clara was more than just a miraculously preserved corpse. Something alive, something horrifying, was lurking inside her. The next morning, Ethan returned to the Capuchin catacombs, his steps heavy as if wading through an invisible fog. The caretakers eyed him strangely, half pity, half fear, but still, they let him in. He walked straight to Clara's glass coffin, where she lay motionless, as perfect as a marble statue. But the air around her was colder now, as if death itself was seeping from the fragile glass. Ethan opened his notebook, flipping through the pages he had spent years compiling. Clara had died in 1910, at just 2 years old, from a mysterious illness no one could explain. Her father, a wealthy merchant teetering on the edge of madness, had spent a fortune ensuring her body would never decay. He had hired an embalmer who used a secret technique, one that no record fully detailed. But the rumors of her eyes opening each night, no one had ever been able to explain them. And every time Ethan thought about it, a bone-deep chill crawled down his spine. Then, something strange happened. The shadows around Clara's coffin began to shift, not because of the light, nor the wind. They slithered, writhing like unseen serpents gliding through the air. Ethan narrowed his eyes, his pulse hammering as he realized they were forming shapes. For a fleeting moment, he swore he saw letters emerge from the darkness. Help! His breath caught. He stumbled back, cold sweat breaking across his forehead. "This is madness," he whispered, running a shaking hand through his hair, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of the mind. But the shadows didn't stop. They coiled around the coffin like a living mist, stretching and contracting as if reaching for him. Ethan hesitated, then extended a trembling hand, pressing his palm against the ice-cold glass. The moment he touched it, a searing cold shot through his arm, piercing into his bones like frozen needles. He gasped, yanking his hand back as darkness swallowed him whole. When the suffocating blackness lifted, Ethan stood there, shaking, his breath ragged. And then he saw it. Clara's eyes were open again. But this time, her pale lips moved. No sound escaped, but Ethan could read the words forming on her bloodless mouth. "Find me." His legs gave out. He collapsed to the stone floor, his head spinning. Was this real? Or was his mind fracturing under the weight of the catacombs' darkness? A distant footstep echoed down the corridor. The caretakers were coming. Ethan forced himself to stand, staggering away from Clara's coffin. But as he fled down the dim passage, he felt it, that unseen gaze clinging to his back. A silent plea from the dead. Back in his apartment, Ethan tore through his notes like a madman. He flipped through pages, scanned documents, searching for any clue about Clara. The more he read, the more desperate he became. Her records were full of holes, contradictions, as if someone had deliberately erased the truth. Then, buried in an old, dust-covered book on the history of the Capuchin catacombs, he found something. A folded piece of paper. Handwritten. The ink was faded, but the elegant script trembled with urgency. It was a letter. Dated October 12, 1910, just days after Clara's death. Ethan's heart pounded as he read. I beg you'd do whatever it takes to keep her with me. I cannot bear to lose her. Use the ancient methods you spoke of. I do not care about the cost. Or the consequences. She must remain like this forever. Ethan's breath caught. Ancient methods? What did that mean? He searched feverishly for more, but the trail went cold. As he sat in the dim glow of his lamp, shadows pooled in the corners of the room. A chill crept over his skin, as though Clara were there, watching. He had uncovered something monstrous. Clara's father hadn't just preserved her body. He had done something much worse. And now, her spirit was reaching out, dragging Ethan into a darkness from which he might never escape. Ethan had no way out. Clara's deep blue eyes, the faint but haunting whisper of "Find me," and the living shadows in the catacombs had trapped him between the world of the living and the dead. He knew he had to act. From Clara's father's letter and the dust-covered tomes in the library, he had uncovered a horrifying truth. Her father had used an ancient, forbidden ritual to bind Clara's soul to her corpse, keeping her body from decaying but also preventing her from passing on. The ritual required blood, hair, and a treasured possession of the deceased, and to break it, Ethan would have to confront the very darkness the ritual had unleashed. On the night of the full moon, Ethan snuck into the Capuchin catacombs. The lights were out, leaving only thick, oppressive darkness around him. He carried a lock of Clara's hair, a small vial containing dried blood from her wrist, and the delicate rose-engraved necklace he had taken from her coffin. Each step echoed like a call from the grave, and the bone-chilling cold clung to him like unseen hands. Standing before Clara's glass coffin, Ethan's hands trembled as he drew a sacred circle in white chalk on the stone floor. Moonlight seeped through a narrow crack above, casting an eerie glow on the markings. He placed the hair, blood, and necklace in the center, lit flickering candles, and burned sacred herbs. The sweet smoke curled upward like spectral mist. As Ethan began chanting the ancient incantation, his voice wavered in the suffocating silence. The foreign words, heavy as stone, echoed through the catacombs, and the shadows around him began to surge. No longer mere wisps of darkness, they snarled and writhed, stretching skeletal claws toward him. The ground trembled. The stone walls seemed to close in. The candle flames sputtered, on the verge of dying. A monstrous force stirred, not to release Clara, but to pull Ethan into the abyss. The darkness inside the circle twisted into a swirling void, its pull relentless. Ethan screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the void as the world around him collapsed. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the catacombs. He stood in a desolate wasteland, the cracked ground resembling the flesh of the dead, the sky a swirling mass of black clouds. The air was thick with decay. In the distance, Clara stood, small and fragile, her sorrowful blue eyes locked onto his. "Help me," she whispered, her trembling hand reaching out. Ethan ran toward her, but the shadows coiled and took shape, grotesque faces, skeletal hands clawing at the air, shrieking as they lunged for him. He realized he had been dragged into the realm of darkness, where Clara's soul had been imprisoned. Beneath her feet, a faintly glowing sigil pulsed, the mark of the curse binding her. Ethan shouted, "What do I do?" Clara pointed to the necklace in his hand. "Break it," she murmured. Without hesitation, Ethan snapped the delicate chain. Instantly, the sigil beneath Clara blazed with blinding light. The shadows shrieked, their forms unraveling into smoke. The ground trembled violently. The dark realm crumbled. An unseen force tore Ethan away, ripping him from Clara's side. "I won't leave you," he cried. But the light swallowed him whole, and Clara's figure dissolved into nothingness. Ethan awoke on the cold stone floor of the catacombs. The candles had burned out. The sacred circle was gone. The hair, blood, and shattered necklace lay scattered around him like remnants of a nightmare. He staggered to Clara's coffin, his heart stopped. It was empty. She was gone. A cold breeze swept through, and for a fleeting moment, he saw her, a faint silhouette at the end of the corridor, her translucent form smiling at him in gratitude before vanishing into the dark. Ethan collapsed, silent tears streaming down his face. Had he truly freed her? Or had he only made things worse? An aching emptiness gnawed at his soul. In the weeks that followed, Ethan lived like a ghost of himself. The catacombs felt lighter now, the oppressive shadows gone, but Clara's empty coffin remained, an eternal reminder of the mystery he could never forget. One night, alone in his dimly lit apartment, he noticed the broken necklace on his desk faintly glowing. When he touched it, warmth spread through his fingers, and an inexplicable peace washed over him. Ethan smiled, knowing Clara was finally free. She appeared one last time in the corner of his room, soft, ethereal, at peace, before vanishing forever. But Clara's story, the thin veil between life and death, the agony of love and obsession, would haunt Ethan's mind forever.